Good morning and welcome to the fifth day of the public hearings in the Media and Digital Platforms Market Inquiry. I thought before we start this morning's proceedings, where we have Arena up first and then Daily Maverick after them, just to announce that we are releasing the schedule for next week's hearings. So next week we have a range of different players, but we start to get into the ad tech and the platforms. So on the first morning, we've got Group M, who deal with the advertising side, so we can understand what advertisers are looking for and how they're viewing this perspective. We also have an ad tech stack, third-party Dentsu, and the public broadcaster is coming in the afternoon. That evening, we've got Microsoft, so Bing and Start. And then on Tuesday morning, we've got Google Search and Google News. We've then got a mix of media companies as well as the Reuters Institute and AIP. So we've got Kagiso Media, Caxton, Prime Media, Independent as well. The third week, just to say, we won't be sitting on obviously not on the 21st, but also not on the 22nd. So it is a truncated week, but that does mean we do overflow, and we are going to only end on the 27th. So on the 26th, we'll have YouTube, and on the 27th, we'll have Meta. And for the third week, we'll release that as soon as we've clarified slots and times. But that is for next week. Right now, we are honored to have Arena Holdings joining us, and we are represented by the acting CEO, Pule Molebeleri. Welcome, and you have brought a team. Thank you very much for that, to bring their expertise. I would ask you to introduce your team and their positions, and then you have some opening statements and a presentation, not PowerPoint, luckily. But please go ahead, and then the panel will have questions following that.
Thank you very much, Commissioner James Hodge and Paula Frey. Good morning. We promise you we're not going to kill you by PowerPoint, which just happens to be wordsmiths. Allow me to introduce my colleagues. I've got on my left Robin Whitley, who is our head of legal. Next to me is my MD of News and Media, Nadim Joshua. And next to Nadim is Bongani Siqoko, Group Content Officer for Arena. We appreciate the time and the privilege that has been offered to us to assist the Commission with its historic inquiry into the media and digital platforms market. Arena Holdings is a South African news and media organization that publishes some of the country's oldest and respected newspapers. We thought we'd just put some context just to get some of the people to understand the depth and the gravitas of these publications that we have. For example, the Herald, first published in 1845, which means it is 179 years old. It is yet to even miss a deadline. The Daily Dispatch was published in 1898. It's 126 years old. The Sunday Times, our most loved weekend newspaper, Sunday paper, was started in 1906. It is 118 years old today. Financial Mail, slightly younger, 65 years old. It was started in 1959. The Sowetan, also slightly younger. It was started in 1981. It is 43 years old today. Business Day is the youngest of our publications. It's 39 years old. It was started in 1985. So our newspapers, Commissioner, are rich with South African and world heritage. Our brands, through the pen and photography, have extensively and credibly captured our complicated and exciting story, and as it unfolded in front of our eyes. Newspapers like the Sowetan, for example, have played a critical part in South Africa's transition and road to a democracy. These newspapers are owned by Arena Holdings, which is a proudly South African company managed and operated by South Africans. We employ over 700 individuals directly and a whole lot more indirectly. To ensure that Arena Holdings continues playing its critical role in a democratic society, it must deal with the existential imperative of transforming a large news and media organization to compete effectively and efficiently in a digital economy while still recovering from the sudden crippling impact of COVID, which worsened an already existing declining trend in physical newspaper circulation. The chances of succeeding with these efforts are significantly hampered by operating in a debilitating anti-competitive marketplace. This is because the South African digital marketplace is distorted and it is flawed. Although other factors contributed to creating an imbalanced digital marketplace, we assert that it is predominantly the duopoly of Google and Facebook that poses the biggest threat to the viability of Arena titles and other independent traditional media organizations. Let's take, for example, the fact that digital advertising makes up to an estimate of 81% of the 12 billion to 14 billion total advertising spend in South Africa, and it is growing at an estimate of 31% year on year. Of this, Google and Facebook secured near monopolies in the most critical advertising categories, with 99% of paid search revenues going to Google and more than 80% of social media advertising going to Meta. When banded together, it means more than 80% of the total digital advertising revenue is secured by two companies in a market with more than 100 independent news and media brands. It is common cause that advertising revenue is the single biggest source of income for news and media organizations. The consequence is therefore that almost all major news media organizations are making losses, with advertising revenue having been disproportionately shifted to Google and to Facebook. The rate of this shift is also accelerating in line with the South African digital commerce market that is rapidly growing towards a 1 trillion threshold. The large digital platform companies that compete in the South African digital space, be it Google, YouTube, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, Microsoft, LinkedIn, Search, Twitter, X, whatever you call it, were set up and built in the US. Over there, they attained an almost insurmountable technology. Facebook and Google have used their substantial financial resources to build unparalleled technological expertise and infrastructure through mass data storage, supercomputing, virtualization, algorithms, and AI to gamify the entire value chain, stretching from content presentation, discovery, engagement, pricing, and trading to display. Their power to determine winners and losers is significant, and it is created through their use of technology to attract and engage large volumes of users. Efforts to address these through competition law and antitrust regulation remains an ongoing effort by the US lawmakers. The borderless nature of the digital marketplace allowed to operationally export their platform business models to other countries where they have created similar unequal anti-competitive digital marketplaces in a winner-takes-all approach. Consequently, several countries outside the US have introduced commissions of inquiry and pursued these antitrust challenges, notably the EU, Canada, UK, and Australia. So South Africa should be commended for following this lead. The digital platform companies have used their technology head start and substantial financial means to distort the South African digital marketplace, where they outcompete local news and media organizations. This runs the risk of foreclosing and eventually bankrupting Arena and other traditional South African news and media organizations, while having no transformational agenda for the country through ownership, supply chain management control, or investments. Their contribution to taxes and other benefits to the country is marginal compared to that of the South African news and media industry. The efforts of the inquiry are therefore welcomed from this perspective. In the spirit of fair competition and in recognition of the benefits that healthy competition brings to consumers and the country, ARENA does acknowledge the role that the large digital platform companies have played in growing the South African digital marketplace and economy, including the introduction of innovative business models and new technology and establishing direct, efficient, and consumer-friendly channels. As such, the best outcome for all stakeholders will be a model where the South African news and media companies can leverage the social media platforms, search engines, and news aggregators as distribution models to get greater reach, more cost-effectively, but wherein they are adequately compensated for their content generation and advertising revenue that the content generates for the digital platforms. Our responses to the questions to the Commission are in line with the sentiments, and we will elaborate on the following summaries in greater detail. And we try to address the points made by Facebook, Microsoft, and Google, in which they defend their business models and the ad revenues that they generate from the larger user communities within the ecosystem traps. They do so by exploiting and marginalizing the role and contribution of traditional media and news origination and the importance that this plays in a social democracy. It therefore needs to be challenged at a constitutional level and ultimately addressed through competition law and regulation where appropriate. We dispute the claim of the aggregators or platforms that the bulk of their feeds and search returns is user-generated news, or that it is merely more relevant and therefore attracts more views and engagement. Trusted sources of journalism give credibility of the aggregated content on their platforms. This is where their feeds of users are seeded with articles from trusted newspapers to give a facade of legitimacy to all the untrusted and unverified accounts and content. Furthermore, their claims that trivialize the content from trusted news sources present a serious underrepresentation of the role that their presentation algorithms play in creating feeds or aggregated content. It also does not reconcile with traffic volumes to online destinations and related data points. Greater transparency is therefore needed on the effect of their algorithms and some of the operational and financial data behind their operations. The fact that one must infer Facebook and Google's share of the digital advertising market is a case in point. We request for greater data transparency and that an independently facilitated framework for compensation is created to give the platform companies and content creators to address the asymmetry and imbalance in the market. This would also seek an independent audit of the recommendations of the algorithms to reconcile with royalty or revenue share payments for content. It also seeks to compensate media companies fairly for content used in search results. This has been done internationally, was enforced by regulators, and has had a significant revenue impact on media companies in those countries. So it's not a pipe dream, this suggestion. In almost all the other industries and markets, it would be an unacceptable leap of faith to blindly accept the feeds of what a trader or seller claims a buyer owes them for a product or a service without the buyer having the means or information to verify whether the asking price is reasonable or that the goods have been provided. Yet Meta is expecting South African advertisers and content generators to do so on Facebook. We recognize that these organizations need to protect their IP and commercial strategies, but a more transparent regime can be created through more direct data sharing with news and media stakeholders or disclosure via an appointed independent third party. Most importantly, aggregated user and financial data to allow regulators to monitor the competitive health of the digital marketplace should be a minimum. We also ask that consideration be given to labeling mechanisms of content on digital media platforms to inject greater transparency and accuracy into the data that needs to be used to monitor the health of industry and inject transparency into commercial arrangements between the digital platforms and their news and media stakeholders. This will also help to address the increasing threat of misinformation and disinformation dissemination, which is very much prevalent in this space. Trusted information needs Trusted information needs to be labeled as such, and information that does not originate from a trusted source or that is clearly misinformation equally needs to be labeled as such. This is not a novel approach that we're proposing. Neither is it technically impossible or logistically and financially burdensome. BBC, CNN, and other news organizations have introduced fact-checking capabilities to label misinformation. Multiple online platforms, including South African entities, do not allow anonymous contributions to feeds. Twitter, which is now X, verified account handles at scale before prior to the takeover by Elon Musk. Taking this further, serious breaches can also be escalated to the Press Council, for example, as per the current processes. Penalties can then go further towards a fund that sponsors and promotes journalism for underrepresented indigenous languages. We also raised sharply the point of plagiarism, which is very, very serious. Copying digital news or media content without compensation for the originator is not dissimilar to music piracy or theft, while passing it on equates to benefiting from a trade in stolen goods. The scale of the platforms acts as amplifiers in that they redistribute any content for free, receiving and recycling endlessly with little or no regard for the origin. As such, plagiarized or content shared without permission is distributed widely and quickly with significant opportunity cost to the original content owners. Mechanisms to detect and stop this on online platforms are wholly inadequate, and a compensation model for when this happens does not even exist. Although not the focus of this inquiry, several issues raised by the inquiry relate to this matter, while mechanisms to address them could be covered by some of the remedial actions and interventions stemming from the inquiry. We must also prepare for a future with AI, for example. The digital marketplace is likely to get disrupted and distorted even further with a greater adoption of AI, especially by the large digital platform companies who have sunk immense resources into research and adoption thereof. The South African digital market and content landscape is unprepared for what's about to unfold, and it is underdeveloped to deal with the impact. As I conclude, the known anticipated impact of using South African online content to train AI models without compensation to writers, journalists, scientists, and content creators needs urgent attention before this content is exploded at scale. The ability to create misinformation and deepfake content, especially in formats like video, audio, and images that are typically trusted by unsuspecting consumers, can cause havoc in a charged and fragile political and social environment like South Africa. Considering that we are even going to an election, this becomes even much more important. The unknown and unanticipated impact requires a multidisciplinary forum to help shape the laws, regulations, and policies to ensure South Africa has a fair and competitive digital marketplace with AI, and that the stakeholder community is adequately prepared. Chair, we cannot and should not render the future of our nascent constitutional democracy to bots and to trolls. I'm going to ask my colleague Bongani just to give us a sense from the impact of these digital platforms insofar as our newsrooms are concerned, insofar as the impact on investigative journalism and the trade-offs that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Pule. Good morning, Commissioner Hodge, Commissioner Frey, and your colleagues.
Bongani, please, just James and Paula, because I'm not even a commissioner.
The CEO insisted that we address you as commissioner. Thank you for the opportunity. So we thought we'll make some remarks, on news content and journalism in particular, and why journalism has to be rescued, and the role that journalism plays in strengthening democracies. In the ever-evolving landscape of media consumption, the role of journalism remains paramount. and I think all of us, we agree. At its core, journalism serves as a beacon of truth, striving to illuminate the world with verified information amid a sea of noise and misinformation. I'm raising this, colleagues, because there is a misconception out there that anyone who has a smartphone, and because of the opportunities that digital platforms like Facebook, X, and YouTube, and I'm sure this argument has been made here, can produce journalism. That is not our view as Arena Holdings. We believe that only journalists can produce journalism. Journalism scholars Bill Kovacs and Tom Rosenstiel, in their seminal work, Essentials of Journalism, aptly describe journalism as a discipline of verification. If journalism is then the discipline of verification, it therefore follows that we cannot just take any information, put it out there on social and digital platforms, and describe it as journalism. These scholars argue that it is only trained journalists that can produce journalism. This is because these journalists possess the tools of verification that many people who have smartphones out there do not possess. This ethos underscores the fundamental principles that guide journalists in their pursuit of truth and accuracy. The essence of journalism lies not only in presenting facts, but also in uncovering the truth about those facts. Kovacs and Rosenstiel advocate for a scientific-like approach to gathering information, emphasizing transparency, humility, and originality as pillars of journalistic integrity. Transparency demands that journalists reveal their methods and sources, empowering the audiences to assess the validity of the information presented. Humility reminds journalists of the fallibility of human perception and the importance of keeping an open mind. By recognizing the limits of their knowledge and exercising modesty in judgment, journalists can enhance the precision and incisiveness of their reporting. Originality underscores the importance of first-hand reporting and independent verification. In an age where information proliferates at an alarming pace, journalists must prioritize the integrity of their work over expediency. Relying solely on secondary sources without conducting due diligence can lead to inaccuracies and undermine public trust. So if we agree with the above definition of journalism, then we must all agree that the agency of protecting journalism as a vital institution cannot be overstated. As journalist and commentator Walter Lippmann argued in the 1920s, the health of any society hinges upon the quality of information it receives. Journalism serves as a cornerstone of democracy, holding power to account and empowering citizens with knowledge. Without a robust and independent press, the fabric of civil society is at risk of unraveling. In the face of evolving technologies and shifting societal norms, the principles espoused by Kovacs, Rosenstiel, and Lippmann remain as relevant as ever. As we analyze the past, the present, and the future of journalism, we have to reaffirm our commitment to truth, transparency, and accountability. The preservation of journalism is not merely a matter of professional integrity. It is a safeguard for the health of our democracy and the validity of our society. This is why we are here today, standing before you not just as journalists, but as guardians of truth, defenders of democracy, and the voice of the voiceless. Our profession, once revered and respected, is now under siege. And if we are to rescue journalism from the brink of extinction, we must first rescue it from the clutches of big tech companies like Facebook, Google, and YouTube, whose rise to the top has been fueled by our own news content. It's evident that platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and X, as Twitter is now known, have thrived on the back of news content, yet they haven't taken steps to compensate for this content. Despite the role that news play in fueling the success of these tech giants, we have not witnessed, funny enough, the rise of Facebook journalists, or an Instagram photojournalist, or a YouTube video journalist. This can be attributed to a straightforward reason. While these companies heavily depend on news content to attract and retain audiences, they are reluctant to invest in compensating creators like ourselves, creators of content like ourselves. Their platforms thrive on the content created by our courageous journalists, who daily risk their lives to report from the front line of conflict zones all around the world. It's time to recognize and celebrate the unsung heroes of journalism. The ones who brave the dangers of war zones, they confront tyrants, unearth truths that shake the very foundations of power. These are the journalists who don't just report the news, but they live it. They are journalists who don't capture moments, but embody the relentless pursuit of truth and justice. That is the story that I want to bring before you today. A story of resilience, of struggle, and ultimately a story of hope. I want to introduce just two of these journalists to you this morning. I want to begin with the tale of one Bareng Gorgeous, a stalwart of sports journalism in South Africa. For over 2 decades, Bareng has been the epitome of dedication, tirelessly covering the highs and lows of our nation's sporting events. From the electrifying atmosphere of the Soweto Derby to the quiet moments of triumph and defeat, his pen has danced across the pages of history, weaving narratives that have captivated audiences far and wide. And yet, despite his unwavering commitment to his craft, Bareng finds himself at odds with the very platforms that claim to support journalism. I'm yet to meet a Facebook sports journalist. I'm yet to meet a Facebook sports journalist who can match Bareng's expertise in covering football. While he pours his heart and soul into his work, his efforts are met with exploitation and indifference from big tech companies like Facebook. It is a travesty that a veteran like Bareng, with his wealth of experience and knowledge, should find himself marginalized by platforms that prioritize profits over journalistic integrity. And he is not alone in his struggle. Across the industry, journalists are facing the harsh reality of a profession under siege, where their work is commodified and their voices silenced by the relentless march of big tech. James Otway, an award-winning photojournalist whose powerful images have also graced the front pages of the Sunday Times, serves as a poignant example of the toll that big tech's influence has taken on our profession. In 2015, James' picture of the gruesome murder of a Mozambican national by the name of Emmanuel Sithole in Alexandra sent shockwaves around the world. Must have been shared thousands of times across the different social media platforms. What James captured with his camera was not just a moment of raw brutality, but a snapshot of a nation grappling with its demons. While these pictures won him major photojournalism awards, James has spoken about how the experience exacted a heavy price on his well-being. Months after he took that image, he wrote in the Sunday Times, and I quote, "Many people have asked me, are you okay? Well, I don't think I am, but I think I will be. I seem to have lost my joy. I can no longer laugh without limits. I drink too much alcohol. I struggle to appreciate beauty. I have to force myself. I sometimes feel very lonely, even around my wonderfully supportive and loving family. I've been very moody and bad-tempered, dark, gloomy moods. People don't really know what to say to me. Many have said, well done. Journalists I meet mention the awards I should win. Some people have said, nice pictures. Strangers have approached me and simply said, thank you for what you did. This is a sobering reminder of the human cost of an industry in decline, where talented journalists like James are left to fend for themselves in a world that no longer values their contributions. I'm yet to meet an Instagram photojournalist, but I know James Otway. He is a visionary storyteller whose lens has captured the essence of our nation. Yet, his talents are squandered by platforms that value clicks over content, engagement over empathy. When he took those images, he was part of a thriving photographic department at the Sunday Times. Today, the once thriving photo department has been decimated, its ranks depleted by the relentless onslaught of big tech. And let us not forget the countless video journalists whose voices have been drowned out by the cacophony of cat videos and clickbait. These journalists pour their hearts and souls into their craft, only to be met with algorithms. As news media companies, we invest in content, yet we reap no investment. We dream of employing hundreds of journalists, yet are forced to retrench them, victims of an industry held hostage by big tech. A snapshot of our own newsroom shows that newsroom jobs at Arena Holdings, in just under 6 years, it shows that in just under 6 years, we've lost almost 50% of our newsroom. In June 2017, we had 455 newsroom staff across the Sunday Times, Business Day, Sowetan, Daily Dispatch, the Herald, and the Financial Mail. This number is made up of journalists, editors, photographers, subs, and content producers. As of the end of last month, February 2024, we only have 260 newsroom staff across these titles. But despite our newsrooms shrinking, we continue to publish exclusive and relevant news content that sets the agenda. In the first 2 months of this year alone, our news team has published just under 20,000 articles across our different news websites, attracting an average of 10.2 million visitors during the same period. But enough is enough. We cannot allow big tech companies to dictate the terms of our profession. We cannot stand by as our voices are silenced and our stories are commodified. We must reclaim journalism from the clutches of big tech and restore it to its rightful place as the cornerstone of our democracy. Despite the challenges that we face, there is hope on the horizon. As journalists, as storytellers, as guardians of truth, we have a duty to fight for the future of our profession. We cannot allow big tech companies to dictate the terms of our industry. We must reclaim journalism from the clutches of big tech and restore our profession to its rightful place. So we urge you, commissioners, and your colleagues, we urge you, fellow South Africans who are listening and watching this morning, to stand with us in solidarity as we wage war against the tyranny of big tech. Stand with us to demand accountability, to demand transparency, to demand fairness and fair compensation. Fight with us as we fight for the future of journalism. Fight with us as we fight for the future of our democracy. For journalism can be saved, but only if we have enough courage to fight for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Bongani. I want to just ask Nadeem then to take us through the e-commerce implications from our perspective.
Hi, morning everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. I think as it's been articulated quite well by both Pule and Bongani, it's quite clear that as a media organization or media in South Africa and globally, we're challenged. Revenues are on a continuous decline, and we see it happening year on year, month on month, day by day. Our revenues continue to be eroded, and the challenge gets harder and harder. We are content businesses, we create content, we invest in content. Sometimes there's opportunities for us to reinvest, but technology doesn't allow that to happen. Because we are facing enormous challenges, I think the question for us is, are all these big techs really a wolf in sheep's clothing? I think that for me is a question that we need to answer. When we look at the abuse of tech organizations, we've got to ask ourselves, what have they developed? What ecosystems have they developed that has made us so reliable on these tech giants? Their business models are about creating a complete value chain that just absorbs and absorbs and absorbs all revenue streams. There were some questions put to us around how do we see snippets that are used on Google search or Facebook, Twitter. When you look at that, that is the push and pull factor. We are providing and we're spending time and energy, we're investing in creating this content. But we are not the ones that are benefiting fully from a revenue perspective. When you go deeper into that, what you find is that on Google search, you'll see a Times Live snippet. That's engaging content. That keeps people on Google search's platform. You cannot have an audience of that nature and not keep them engaged. We, as media organizations, sometimes hope, and we do this in the hope that we can drive traffic to our site so that we can benefit from their advertising revenue. But here's the scenario. The snippet stays on Google search. The longer that individual does not click on that link and be shifted to our website, the more money Google makes. But in doing that, if by any chance that user clicks on that, comes to Times Live's website, Google is making money there as well. That's the scenario. That's the ecosystem that they've built. That's the reliance that they've built. Over and above that, the services and the tech that we use, we are paying for, licensed. And guess what? Google Ad Exchange, Google Analytics, and the Google Ad Manager systems. We pay for these services. So a scenario is simple. The erosion continues. It doesn't work in favor of media organizations. It's clear. We are driving engagement because our content does that. We create great content that keeps people on a platform, that keeps people engaged, that keeps people coming back. But we are not benefiting from revenue. Google, in its report, claims that the news content only accounts for 2 to 3% of their overall revenues and what they do. How true that is, I'm not sure. Because when you go onto search, and if anybody does that now, there will be news articles that will pop up. I think in the previous, by Media 24, they clearly articulated and they demonstrated that. And that holds true for all of us. What we need to get to and where we need to be, big tech also needs to be a lot more transparent. The transparency levels just don't exist. I'll give you an example of a video that we did on Oscar Pretorius. YouTube has claimed that they would pay about 37 Rand per thousand for views, per 1,000 views. The Oscar Pistorius video on our platform reached 11 million views. So if you do the maths of the 37 Rand, we should have received over 400,000 Rand in revenue. The uncertainty and the confusion comes in is that that video only generated us 54,000 Rand. So when you recalculate it, the average CPM that YouTube says of 37 Rand has become 4 Rand. So this is where the confusion comes in. There is no transparency with big tech. And that's just one example of how we don't know from one day to the next what's going to happen. We spend millions and millions of rands on developing content, on developing our newsrooms, and we're not seeing the rewards. We invest in the technologies to keep us in play, to keep our audiences engaged, but the revenues are not supporting it. So we are still, again I ask, is big tech the wolf in sheep's clothing? The promise of greater and better in a digital age, is it really in existence? Our newsrooms continue to invest and continue to develop, and we've got to keep trying to keep up with the changes in technology. Another great example is this algorithm. The algorithm is all over the place. One morning you wake up and the algorithm changes without any notice. It then takes us more time now to re-engage, to get back. We've seen last year and for the last 2 years how our audiences on our digital platforms have just plummeted. And we don't really have answers as to why. The algorithm is something that there's no openness. There's no transparency as to how this is being used. They give us guidelines, yes, fantastic. They give us guidelines on what they think we should know about how to manage the algorithm. But it changes from day to day, and it changes quite often. So we're always back at the drawing board. We're always looking back, trying to fix up, trying to catch up, because the advertising revenues, when your audiences start declining, your engagement starts declining, your advertising revenues that's supposed to support that also starts declining. So you're always on the back foot when it comes to that. We talk about some of the fast-loading tech, and AMP is one of them, a Google product. The fascinating thing about AMP was we all had to play and get up to speed with this tech and the advancement that they were bringing to the table. We had to spend millions and millions of rands investing in this tech for them to say one day, actually, we're removing certain parts of it that makes your capability outdated, redundant. There's no easy replacement to that. They're not forgiving on the fact that we've spent 5-6 years reinvesting in trying to keep up with this capabilities. And one day we wake up and it's not there. So it's a challenge, I think, all round. It's a challenge that we try and navigate on a daily basis. And it's quite scary for us to be always on the back foot when we know that we are spending millions and millions of rands on creating the content that's keeping audiences engaged, and that they are continuously abusing and not willing to compensate fairly. And I think the answer or the question to Google and to the big tech companies is, firstly, engage with media organizations openly, transparently. Don't have the big brother approach and you're going to do as we say. We do add value. We see it. We see that we add value. Engage us on it. And let's find a win-win solution going forward.
All right, thank you, Nadim. Chair, I'm going to ask Robin to just give us a number of remedial actions that we are proposing, and then we can get into questions.
Thanks, Chair, and my team. We've just got a few remedial actions based on, the context of the powers of the Commission, or items that we feel the Commission should address in their remedial actions, and that's been elaborated on by our team. Our first issue is data. There's no doubt that data is a new currency and very important to us. ARENA's submission to this inquiry and studies conducted in other jurisdictions, and in this instance, the UK Competition Markets Authority, found evidence that Google and Facebook enjoy significant data advantages in the provision of their user-facing and advertising services. And to this end, it concluded that these advantages are self-reinforcing in their nature, and they currently exist at such a scale that they are insurmountable without regulatory intervention. And what we also the studies conducted by the other markets or other jurisdictions, serve as good precedent for us. In that, the UK CMA and their information officer, which is the equivalent of our information officer, they produced a joint report on data sharing competition issues, and we feel a similar intervention could help. There is a defense that's put up, in relation to PIA. We've looked at issues relating to data sharing. We believe there could be greater data sharing with compliance to POPI. We don't believe all the data amounts to what's described in there as personal information, and we believe to this end the Commission should focus on a joint collaboration, possibly with the information regulator, and look at these sorts of things. We believe then that data sharing could lessen or increase competition in the digital space. Nadeem touched on the opacity of the market, both in relation to information, but this information is not data, but information on how their system operates, whether the deal was fair, and then also in relation to pricing. Nadeem touched on that. To this end, we believe that there could be an industry code. We know the Consumer Protection Act speaks of industry codes, and we haven't fully considered whether this fits neatly, but considerations to that extent on a industry code that could govern these markets. That Pule touched on the taxes, and News 24 also on the arrangement that Google as a group has, and extracting the majority of the fees that's earned in this country to itself in another jurisdiction. And the issues that were touched on by our team is this just compounds it, that we are struggling fiscus, and large amounts, substantial amounts, are just extracted from the country. Then Pule also touched on our copyright enforcement. A consideration on a mandatory industry code to be implemented to govern takedown processes on digital platforms operating in South Africa. This, we believe, will assist us in enforcing our copyright and protect our content on the digital platforms. And then lastly is a topic that sits squarely in is the abuse of dominance, and that's been thrown around, or the term, not loosely thrown around. But we appreciate it's a very complex exercise, defining the markets and complexity that sometimes favors these digital platforms, but we do think the Commission should dive deep into that. There can be little doubt that even if you take the digital platforms as a whole, as a market, that Google is dominant. The indicators of their dominance are in issues like substitution, the lack of suitable alternatives, barriers of entry, their market share, their financial performance, and again, this opacity that we all are indicators of market power. And where this leads us, and hopefully one doesn't have to get to that, is that we know the law would need to find a prohibited practice before we could even get to private damages, if we ever have to get to so the Commission would need to find that Google and these guys have committed, if eventually we want to proceed with private damages in terms of the Compensation Act for their conduct. And we feel that those issues, broadly speaking, we could, they're very detailed, that the Commission should focus on in their recommendations, their referrals, in their final report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask Bongani just to touch a little bit on multimedia and investigative journalism, because Nadeem touched on that point. But just suffice to say, we are a for public good institution, and we're not helpless victims. We invest understanding our mandate and our responsibility, and we take it very seriously. And that's why we invest so much, because accuracy is very important. You can never build a nation on the basis of disinformation. But there's a bigger point as well, as we're looking at the digital point, and the point I was trying to make earlier about citing the newspapers and their history and why they are still existing, because other media organizations have been forced to move into the digital platforms, neglecting the actual physical distribution of newspapers, neglecting to appreciate where they are existing. We are operating in South Africa. It's an emerging country. Not everyone is on not everyone has access to broadband. Not everyone has access to cheap data and what have you. There is a fear that we also have, if one day we're to lose newspapers and what have you, to say we're going to leave the bulk of a lot of people behind. It's a significantly worrying thing, because these papers are shining the light in dark corners, in dark areas where especially the authorities don't want us to play in. Also, there's an issue of education that we play, because newspapers are not just only about investigations. They also play a very important role in bringing other people who are left outside into the mainstream economy in one form or the other. Bongani, if you can just touch on the multimedia quite quickly and investigative journalism.
No, thanks, Pule. This was one of the issues that we were asked to touch on when we were invited to come for the hearing. So investigative journalism it's in our DNA as Arena Holdings. You can go across, the different news platforms, from down at the Dispatch, Sowetan, Financial Mail, the Sunday Times. We are known for our investigative journalism as a news group. We are not in any way anti-tech as a group. We believe that multimedia actually enhances investigative journalism, providing a dynamic platform for storytelling in a way that engages audiences in new ways that were not there before. Multimedia allows us to blend traditional reporting techniques with new modern technologies. It allows us to blend audio with video, interactive graphics, QR codes, and all of that. So it really, really enhances investigative journalism, because we now have to tell the story in different formats. We have to distribute your news content in different formats. Through multimedia, we're able to break down intricate details and present them in a way that is easier for audiences to understand. For an example, instead of describing the intricacies of a financial scandal, what was the latest one? The one that FM really, the Steinhoff story, through text. I mean, in the past, we would have told that story only through text. But, journalists these days are able to use multimedia elements such as interactive charts and graphs and all of these things, making it easier for the readers, for consumers to, digest the information. So we are fully invested, in multimedia. We use it across the group. The thing is, you have to invest in these things, but there's just we're unable to monetize some of the content that we publish on these platforms. Video, for an example, we create a lot of video content as Arena Holdings. Last year, I have not checked this year. Last year, in fact, we stopped. We did an exercise because we wanted to try and understand YouTube as a platform. What else do we need to do, to monetize our content on YouTube and all of that? We have a number of channels as a group, on YouTube, and we wanted to first check the amount of video content owned by Arena that is sitting on YouTube. We stopped at 6 million hours of content. We stopped counting. We then went to our finance guys to then say, how much have we in the 10 years? We went back 10 years. In the 10 years that we've had that content, how much have we received from YouTube? That content had only brought us about just under 400,000 in 10 years. So despite the investments that we've made, we have to buy equipment to be able, to incorporate these multimedia elements in our reporting. We have to buy equipment, we have to buy software. We've had to invest in podcast studios. We've had to invest in cameras and other equipment that is needed for you to be able to do this. But just unable to monetize. But we do journalism, investigative journalism as a group, as Pule says, because it has to be done. That's what we're known for. That is our contribution to deepening this democracy in South Africa. We've done a lot of investigations. You can go as far back to 1977 when Steve Biko was killed in police cells. That investigation was published by our reporters. Right up to the early 90s, in the early years of this democracy, our investigative journalism, some of the guys that reported extensively on the arms deal, for an example. We've done stories, about, the quality of water. We've done, we've investigated the health system. Your own colleague here, she used to work at the Daily Dispatch when the Dispatch did a story about why young babies were dying at Frere Hospital in East London. And that story led to, the axing of the then Deputy Minister of Health, because she agreed with what the newspaper had found. So our investigative journalism has really, really led to a change in public policy, and we're very, very excited by that. So there's space for investigative journalism. As Arena Holdings, we're going to continue investing in investigative journalism. We're going to continue employing and building investigative capacity within our newsroom, because it is in our DNA. Thank you, Pule.
James, back to you. I'm struggling to call you Commissioner James.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you. I think what has been so important is to bring home the real importance of journalism for everyone in the country, for our democracy, and I think some of those stories, certainly they live in my memory and have had big impacts on society. So also thanks to Arena for the role they play. I don't know, Paul, if you want to just pick up on some of that.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that James is going to have lots of questions around the tech and revenue, but I wanted to start with the journalism, and Bongani, probably start with you. I mean, listening to you speak about shrinkage in the newsroom to around 216 reporters across all your titles. I think many people who are listening to the hearings will say, well, this is a business, and so why are you special? I mean, I wonder if you could articulate, what makes media critical in the context of a country like South Africa?
So as I've said, we have a very, very critical role to play in deepening democracy in holding power to account, both in the public sector and the private sector. Financial Mail, for example, most of the investigations that they've done have been in the private sector, in particular in the financial services sector. We hold the powerful, to account, across the spheres of government. It's very, very important. The problem with the shrinking newsrooms now is that the focus has tended to be on the national government, on the national stories. And because we don't have enough resources, no one is focusing on what is happening on the ground, at local government level, at municipal level, the bread and butter issues that, for an example, newspapers like the Dispatch in our group are known for, because you don't have those resources. No one, I'll just make some silly examples. In the past, you used to have, reporters who are just going to go around the different beaches and collecting water sample. You then send it out there to be tested, and you are able then to report about the quality of water in that locality. Who has those resources now? Because the little that you have in your newsroom, you now have to prioritize and say, which stories do I cover? And most of the time, we're not necessarily covering stories that the audiences, the local audiences want, but stories that we think they are interested in, because we no longer have those resources. So journalism, if practiced right, Paula, if we can have the right resources, and if we can do it right, journalism can also be a change agent. Like I'm saying, some of the stories that we've done, I'll give you another example now. So I'm going to give you another story about the Daily Dispatch because it happened when I was down there. But like I was saying, most of our stories have actually led to a change in public policy. For me, that's very, very important. I'll give you a story just now. Back when I was still at the Dispatch, I think I was a news editor at the time, we had a reporter called Zina George. She was covering education. And she was covering a story around food, the nutrition program, yes. And we had been covering this story. When she comes back, everyone then says, but how do we tell the story differently? I mean, every week we have this story, and the photographer comes back. Back in those days, every reporter who went out on a story with a photographer. These days, you can't afford that. Reporters have to use their own cell phones to take photographs. It was not even the reporter that came with the angle. It was a photographer who then said, as we were approaching, the guy was Chinese. So as we were approaching the school, the kids saw him driving the car, and then they said to him, do you have food for us? I'm like, oof, there's our angle. A picture of this kid who was asking, do you have food for me? So it was a human interest story. We zoom in on the kid and told the story of how this entire food nutrition program had collapsed. That story sent national ministers down. It sent the president back then, I think it was President Thabo Mbeki, even wrote about it in his weekly Friday newsletter. It led to government changing how this food or school nutrition program functions. But without a newspaper like the Dispatch in a semi-urban area or rural area that it serves, without a newspaper like that, like the Dispatch, that would not have happened because it is the newspaper that brought that to the fore. So I'm saying journalism has a role, and if done right, journalism can also be a change agent in South Africa.
Well, if I may add a bit, because there's another aspect of content threat that we have. We have both Business Day and Financial Mail. Those are specialist publications, business publications. You don't just get a normal run-of-the-mill reporter. You must really invest a bit in getting top-notch writers who can at least analyze, read a balance sheet. And it's significant. because if you look at the story of modern day South Africa, there's public sector corruption, but there's been private sector corruption, which has been enormous, and it can be picked through those meticulous analysis of people reading balance sheets and seeing corporate governance breaches that you wouldn't ordinarily see. So that skill set as well is fast diminishing because, we're struggling to retain that type of skill set. We're struggling to train and keep resharpening and all those other things. But the pernicious effect of that loss of skill has an impact broadly because many people have a misconception that the monies that are being invested in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is just monies for institutional investors. But where do those institutional investors get money from? From pension funds. But whose pension funds are those? Are those people that Bongani is talking about? It's your teachers, your army people, your nurses, and all those who are not fully represented in there. So they don't have someone who is safeguarding their investments and exposures and the like. So there's a wholesome potential impact, on the loss of this public good service that, newspapers continue to play. And we posit that much as the traditional business model is disrupted, the baby should not be thrown out with the bathwater.
Just one last contribution on this issue, Paula. Everyone knows the role of journalism as that of being a watchdog. And I think, as journalists in South Africa, or our journalists in South Africa, I'm a former journalist, well, let me say journalists and not include myself. But I think journalists in South Africa have played that role very, very well over the years. They've played very, 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 very well. But I think there's another role that I don't think we have fully understood, and that's why we have not yet started playing that role very well. I call it the guide dog role. I'll give you an example of what happened in a small town in the US. I don't remember the name now. So news editors, they come into the editors' conference in the morning and they pitch their stories, what the paper, I don't know if James knows this, but it's called a diary. So this is when you collect the list of stories that people are working on. They then come to the editors' conference and they pitch the story. And the editor rejects it. He's like, I'm tired of hearing stories about yet another law enforcement officer has been killed on our streets. I'm not interested in it. They went back. The news editors felt strongly that the story needed to be told. Then at the midday conference, they come back with the same story, but they want to tell it differently. They then want to make a call to the community to say, join us, at this community hall. We want to have a discussion with you. This is the newspaper now, because you have just murdered Constable so-and-so, and we want to understand why do we continue killing the very people who are supposed to be protecting us as a community. So the editor was excited to say, fine, let's do that. The story was told, but there was another call that then says, can you come, can we have a conversation as a community? In that town hall, the meeting was facilitated by the same journalists trying to understand what is going on. In the hall were business people, community leaders, faith leaders, and all of that. They were young and old people. The old people would say, no, it's the youngsters who are doing this, and the youngsters would say, yeah, but we have nothing to do. A businessman sitting in the room, he then says, okay, if there are no extramural activities in the area, I've got a warehouse that I'm not using. I don't have money to, revamp it. Somebody says, okay, fine, I'll be responsible for that. I'll do this. We can turn it into an indoor sports center. To cut a long story short, a year later, when the newspaper went back on that story, because what then happened right throughout every milestone, they kept reporting about this story. The sports center is now being, painted and this and this. When they went back a year later, they found that the crime rate had gone down. It had gone down because they had started a conversation in that community about why is our crime going up, why are we killing police, what can we do? these are the problems, okay, how do we solve these problems? So the newspaper moved from just reporting to actually facilitating a dialogue with the hope of finding a solution for that local community. And that's what I call the guide dog role. And I think if we can, with all the problems that we are having in South Africa, journalism can really, really play a part in helping us find solutions to some of the social ills that we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Bongani.
Yeah, sure. I think that is important, and I think that's what makes it so important in South Africa. I mean, we've seen action in other countries, but I think the reason we started this in South Africa was because with a young democracy, it matters a lot more. And Pule, I'm glad you raised the issue of also holding private to account. I mean, our former chair of the tribunal used to say, part of the value of the commission when it started was shining a light into those dark corners. And I think it's right, it holds people to account, but I think it also starts to deter people from doing harmful things because they will be held to account if they do. And the weakening of the media probably means that more harmful conduct can thrive. That change, that deterrence effect. I just wanted to cover one thing addition on sort of what is lost, because I suppose it's the stories we're not covering, the people who should be held account, whether private or government, that are not being. But also, as a country, we're part of a continent that is looking for integration. And I think we've seen the demise of bureaus and reporting, and I'm certainly noticing a lot more the international, at least some of the news is coming from other bureaus, the big ones globally. I mean, have we lost something in South Africa in terms of our reporting in Africa and our relationship with the continent?
Let me take a bite on that one, and this has been my bugbear in the organization. Sadly, yes. I mean, when 10, 15 years ago, an organization like ours would have a London bureau, 3, 4 people easily, 1 or 2 in the US, and sadly the rest of the continent, psychologically and ideologically, has always been a problem. We've never really had a lot of bureaus in the continent, which has been sad because it created that misunderstanding and the xenophobic things that we've had, and a mystery about coverage. So it's been an area of passion for me. And we've been trying very hard, and we thought, with this digital landscape, because, digital is now borderless, content is now borderless, we want to go into that environment. However, it requires investments. So you're not only having to invest in the technology, you must also invest in the stringers. You must, because then as well the issue of quality, of content that you also get, that you source, also very important. Sadly, we no longer have the London bureau. We no longer have the US bureau. Embarrassingly, when the World Cup was recently held in France, we could not even afford to send, one of our own, understanding that, rugby is a big passion. We tried to innovate, obviously, and we got a private partner to, Johnson's Workwear, I'll mention them, to basically help us to send, a report. And we're very grateful for that because he did an amazing, amazing job capturing that historic win. Can you imagine? We would have had to rely on Reuters or AP to capture that historic moment. Someone will say, well, so what? But it's not a so what, because it's history. All the content that we capture goes to the archives. And the archives also are our archives. It becomes our heritage. We can reflect, we can research, we can recycle, can do all sorts of other things in that space. And I'll also show you another limitation that we face also on monetization of that archive. We had a picture of the death of former President Nelson Mandela, and we had a picture that was taken by an external person, and we captured that as a Sunday Times. We put it out there not too long ago, when everyone is moving into these NFTs and what have you. We wanted to take that page, put it out there and then see if we can commercialize it in one form or the other. We were blocked by that photographer because it was not our photographer. So we're sitting with, again, a historic archive that essentially has been rendered, redundant, cannot be used, precisely because of those other elements. And these are the dangers of what's going to happen when, our archives essentially moves from being safeguarded by us, moving into these spaces that we don't own, we don't control, and we can't even recycle, we can't even retell, we can't even re-optimize those stories. And these are our stories. So from that perspective, the archives also are a very significant component of this, because as you saw, I said, the first publication that we had was in the 1800s, and that's our history. You can never find it anywhere. And the beauty about speaking for Arena specifically, because, we've gone through colonialism, gone through apartheid, we've gone through all sorts of other things. At least one thing that I can vouch is that our content can never be found wanting. Much as, ideologically, maybe there were one or two things, our content has always been trusted content. We've always practiced journalism in the Arena, and accuracy has always been our key focal point. And that's one thing that we really continue to pride ourselves as a business. Yeah.
I mean, maybe just picking up that archive element. I mean, we have heard this week from a professor from University of Pretoria, Vukusi Marivati, who gave us an education on AI and AI crawlers and web scraping, and I mean, his view was that archives probably scraped already, but that South Africa is not necessarily woken up to this in the same way. So I just wanted to find out from Arena's perspective, I mean, what has been your approach to AI, the content, and the use of that content? What is your view?
We value we place enormous premium on our archives. We are proud of it, because it's not just content. It is also, photographs that can never be found anywhere. The Kaizer Chiefs just did a thing about Kaizer Motaung. I spoke to Jessica, the daughter, and she was saying she went into our archives and she was surprised by the enormous library that we had about, her father. It's that detailed, it's that enormous. But I sleep with one eye as the accounting officer because of what happened with the UCT library when it caught fire. I sleep with one eye because we have not sadly managed to digitize our content. Our archives are just sitting there. If it catches fire, a significant institutional history of South Africa would be gone in a blink of an eye. We have tried, we've put some of our, just to try and safeguard the situation, We've gotten into partnerships with some of the universities to see if they can assist in this regard. So some of our content is there, some of it is over there, and the likes. But it is this, struggle of a trade-off, redirection of resources. You have to make a trade-off. What are you going to do? What are you going to do first? You have to keep, the journalist employed. You have to update your technology. You have to safeguard your content. And then the archives become an afterthought. But it's a worrisome thing, but it's due to lack of investment and lack of resources that we have not really done well in this regard. But it's a worrying thing. And if you were to think about what AI and the likes are going to do, think about the fear, the threat of misinformation and disinformation content that is out there. Because what AI does is going to fetch and reproduce what is already existing. So we do not have, if part of our, I would say, original, authentic, reliable and relevant and credible content is not there, AI will give you what is existing, and you can't blame AI for that. And unfortunately, it will reproduce these skewed, dangerous, undercooked thoughts that are going to be reproduced and recreated and recycled as, opinion or as thought in our country.
I don't know if you've got any more questions on AI. I just want to divert a little bit to community media, if that's fine. In your submission, you highlighted community media as being particularly vulnerable in this particular moment from a digital point of view, and that really that in order to survive in the future, you needed these big companies, scaled companies that were multi-channel strategies. Could you speak a little bit about your three Eastern Cape community media and why you think that they even more vulnerable than a Sunday Times or Financial Mail?
So I think earlier on you heard how at a community level there's still that activist journalism that takes place. And in the Eastern Cape, our three titles play exactly that role. We are still holding the local municipalities to account. And what you find in that space is that journalist or editor that's running a specific title is really entrenched in that community and is part of that community and is really unpacking and unearthing what's actually happening at that level, which sometimes does not necessarily get the attention of a Daily Dispatch or the Herald. But within our business, we are able to integrate that, right? So because we own those three community titles, we're able to take those local stories, hyper-local stories, and highlight that and bring that to the fore. There's been instances where the local paper, for example, Talk of the Town, that looks after the Port Alfred region, becomes that charitable foundation as well. So when there are issues in the community, it's their office where people go and drop off clothes and food, etc., to help the communities that have been affected by any disasters that have taken place. And that, for us, is a major concern. And when we look at it from our perspective, the investment needed to regurgitate or re-engineer that entire business is enormous, right? They rely on that local publication. They've got 4 or 5 local journalists, young journalists as well. So it also is a nice training ground. But to really digitize that business, to really take it to a level where they actually start making money and not reliant on those retail inserts, which all community titles are reliant on, is going to take enormous amounts of investments from our side. And that's the prioritization that we as a business always got to look up. Do we keep these businesses alive? How do we keep them alive? How do we relook at it? How do we resource? How do we reinvest in those local communities so that in 10, 15, 20 years' time, these local community titles are still relevant, are still part of those institutes that they've been grown with. Queenstown Rep is almost 100 years in existence. So that's how far back these community titles go. It's not fly-by-nights that come up today and then gone in 6 weeks' time. they've been entrenched in those communities. They're part of the DNA. People understand them. People know them. People know their local editor. People know their local journalists. And that for us is a critical part of why we keep community titles alive. We also try and build partnerships. One of the partnerships that we work on quite closely is on the AIP side, and they've been talking to us to assist them. If we as big media organizations are not going to also try and assist and guide and support and be mentors and coach, they're not going to survive in the next 15 to 20 years because of the dominance of the big tech, and they're only solely reliable on advertising revenue.
And maybe to add there, Paula, the challenge for community newspapers is the existential threat of being squeezed out by also national papers, because national papers are being suffocated. They are now forced to really also become a bit more provincial or even a little bit more regional, and at some stage they'll become a whole lot more local. Yet the local community newspapers are also faced with the same problems that the national papers are faced with. So whether it's paper increases, I mean, we've had to take savage paper increases. The price of petrol has been enormous. I mean, think about the distribution cost for a community newspaper. Again, they have the same challenges of rates and services that all of us are subjected to. So there's no, I would say, better, I would say, calmer and a bit more forgiving economic model for community newspapers. They're just reliant on retail advertising, and if that retail advertising doesn't come, they're dead. And these ones are having even a particular challenge, especially those that are independent on their own. They are having specific challenges, because they also have to comply with other press council and other regulatory bodies. They must be authenticated by the ABCs. It costs money for them as well to get to that level. So it's a dynamic struggle for them on a day-to-day basis. But for us, going back to the Pan-Africa situation, it is still the same situation. We are being forced deep inside instead of actually looking upwards to ensure that we give the citizen of South Africa and of Africa information. It bothers me that sometimes you have international guests coming to Namibia or to Botswana. It's a president of significance are coming to the region, and we just down in South Africa, we don't even know, we don't even care. What was that president doing in Botswana? We need to know. We need to tell our audiences what is happening in there. We need to know. A railroad being built from the east to the west to circumvent Richards Bay. Our audiences need to know, our business people need to know, our communities need to know what is happening. So we can't even get into those stories in detail. The diplomatic stories of what's happening at the AU in Addis, I mean, we're not even beginning to scrape, what's the story. I mean, we had the Chinese ambassador leaving not too long ago. I mean, I attended that attended that session. We had half the cabinet there. But I didn't see the stories being written about to say what was happening. I mean, why was this ambassador so popular with half of that cabinet? What was the significance of half the cabinet being in that room? So there's a big challenge in terms of our ability to can keep telling and informing our citizens, or at least making our citizens to be more informed, so that they can cherish and live through the ideals of our constitution, which says, you have freedom to information, freedom of expression, and the likes.
As I was going to ask you, what gets lost when media aren't here, but from what you're saying, we're already losing out on the variety of stories, the depth of stories, the range of stories from across the continent. We've had a number of people come here and say that the state of the media is really perilous, it's really difficult, and I'm wondering, is that overblown?
I don't think so. I think it's correct because we are doing the most with the little that we have. We are stretching our resources, human resources, technical resources. It's actually terrible what we are expecting of our journalists. It's terrible. And after COVID, we've had instances of people also having mental wellness issues because we were really, how do I put this, extracting too much out of our colleagues. Because we're no longer in that era, Paula, where you had bloated newsrooms. It's literally now it's worse. It's fewer, but you're also expected to report in multiple platforms. There's a podcast that is expected of you. There's an analysis that you must write over and above having written a piece. You must also maybe appear on our TV product where you can also come in and opine. So it's a race to the bottom. But the issue is that the resources that we have been rather reprioritized and be put into this digital ecosystem that has promised so much but has under-delivered. A full-page ad is still much more valuable. We have more people who come into our digital platforms. We've got millions, but we make peanuts in that space. So it goes without saying that for us, if we could be compensated fairly for the content that we've been doing, we can do more, and we can hire more journalists. We can even serve big tech better because it is to the advantage that they will obviously scrape this content and get more audiences. So it's not a loss for them. All we're saying is that be reasonable, be a partner, and help these business models that have been disrupted negatively. Because the issue was that when Google came, they were just going to be not even playing the advertising space, and look at what they've done. And that's why what Nadeem was speaking about on the wolf reference, I agree with it. I think it's actually that scenario, and it's scary for the future. And that's why I was deliberate on iterating the years of these newspapers. If a nation without a memory is really at a loss.
Can I maybe just add one more thing? I think one of our biggest challenges is, I think the internet has really destroyed our traditional model. We know that. It's wreaked havoc. But I think one of the biggest challenges, or one of the challenges that it has created, is that we are now trying to sell our product to an audience or a generation that is used to getting things for free on the internet. So I have a 20-year-old son. About 8 years ago, he was only 12 at the time. So I'm on my laptop and I'm buying an album on iTunes, and he's sitting next to me. So he then says to me, "Dad, what are you doing?" I'm like, "No, I'm buying music." He says, "Yeah, no, I see that, but why?" I was like, "No, I like the artist." He said, "No, but why are you paying?"